Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the Oraculos True Divination podcast, where I bring you ancient wisdom for the modern mystic. I'm your host, Mychal Bryan, and joining me today from all the way across the pond is Alex Trenoweth. Alex, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Mychal.
Alex, I'm really excited to dive into what we're going to be talking about today. But before that, for those listeners out there who are new to the True Divination podcast, this is a podcast where I bring you interviews from astrologers around the world who are making waves within our field of astrology. And these have been authors and teachers and just trailblazers on the ground doing the work of taking astrology to the people. So if you are interested in being a part of that momentum that we're building here on the True Divination podcast, please do not only subscribe to the podcast by clicking on the button down below, but also like, share, talk about the podcast with your other astrological friends so that we can keep this magic growing and flowing from our heart to yours. Now, Alex, once again, major thanks for being here. So I know that you have been a part of astrology and involved in astrology for a very long time. Can you tell our listeners and viewers about how you came to enter astrology as a field and also some of the work that you've been doing professionally as an astrologer?
Well, I came into the field as a skeptic. When I was a young teenager, my mom was reading the horoscopes of the newspaper, and I'm a Cancerian. My birthday is July 20th. And she was reading the description of Cancerians as home-loving and shy. And I thought, what? No, I'm not home-loving. I'm not shy. I can't wait to get out of here and do my own thing and have my own life and that kind of stuff. So I just thought astrology was a load of rubbish. And then when I was at university, another friend was, she was asking me about my star sign, and I'm saying, well, I'm on the cusp of Leo. You know, I never admitted to being a Cancerian. It's always on the cusp of Leo. And she says, well, no, your sun's in Cancer, but I bet your moon is in Leo. And I thought that completely transformed the way I looked at astrology, because I didn't realize there were other things that you looked at in astrology. I've been so dismissive of it that I didn't, I closed my mind to it. So when she said, but my moon is in Leo, it all made a lot more sense. And so from then I was hooked. Of course, you start with your own chart first. I was doing my own calculations. I was, checking them against computerized calculations. And, I got really excited. And then I found my way into the Faculty of Astrological Studies to formalize my education a good few years later. And eventually I started working with... I became a school teacher to pay for astrology classes because, they're really expensive. And I thought that being a school teacher would mean I'd have weekends and Christmas and Easter and long summer holidays to study astrology. And I think it took me about a week before I realized that the life that I had envisaged was not going to happen. And the other thing that happened to me is my astrology name is Alex, but I have a legal first name. And when the nobody uses, except for doctors and bankers who I don't want to hear from. And when I said to the head teacher, and I don't like this name, can you call me Alex? Well, she says, let me think about it. And so she must have Googled me. And I was formally, very, very important to say this, formally summoned back to her office the next day when I was told in, no uncertain terms that, I could not be called Alex in school. If a parent found out I was an astrologer and complained, I could lose my job for gross misconduct for bringing the school into disrepute. So this was a Christian academy, and I have a lot to say about astrology and Christianity these days. And it's never happened that I've gotten into trouble for being an astrologer. But if it ever does happen, I have a lot to say, and I have my defense all prepared. So from there, I started to realize, about a year in the classroom, I just realized it wasn't going to work for me. I was unhappy. And I experimented with using astrology because telling me I can't do something is a sure way to guarantee I'm going to try to get it in there somehow. So I started off using, because I teach high school, I started teaching, I started putting students into their elements. So I have the birth data, right? So I put all the fire signs in one section, all the earth signs in the next one, all the air signs, and then all the water signs, thinking I was being terribly
Wow.
clever. But if you're a teacher or a parent and listening to this, don't ever do that. Because what happened was, of course, the fire signs took over. The air signs, of course, shouted across the room at the fire signs. The earth signs just kind of sat there in silent shock. And of course, the water signs started hugging themselves and rocking to self-soothe. So, that's not a great idea. Another thing that happened with, and then when I was really convinced myself that I was going to leave the profession, I had this epiphany. And I was teaching Macbeth. And I was thinking to myself, I got to get out of this. I can't do this. It's crazy. And I looked out at them. And I thought, oh, hold on. You guys all have the same Jupiter sign. And you all have the same Saturn sign. And if I can teach to your Jupiter sign the thing about expanding your minds, if I can create activities that are going to engage you, then I've won the battle. And then, of course, their Jupiter signs and Saturn signs play off of my Jupiter Saturn signs. So to me, it opened up a whole different realm of understanding how my students teach and learn. So suddenly, from being a struggling teacher, always being pulled up for not doing something right, I suddenly understood my Saturn, and I became a much better teacher and a much happier one too, much more effective. And I wrote a book about it as well. And then finally, the other thing I did in an education was, we have a massive student behavior base. If a student misbehaves, we have records. And I was in a position called head of year, which means I was in charge of all the different groups of the same year. And and I worked with other heads of year. So, I was head of year 9, and someone else was head of year 10. And we were having a little casual meeting. And it was a bad day. One of those bad days when the incident sheets just keep coming. And you just think to yourself, I'm never going to go home because I got to process these and call parents and do the exclusion forms, and all these things were going on. And although the students don't know I'm an astrologer, my colleagues do.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues said, oh, look at all these incident sheets. It must be a full moon. And I thought to myself, it's not a full moon. It's actually a new moon. Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if I somehow had the energy and the time to sort all these things out and start looking at it? But once I left the profession, taking my database with me, I started sorting through this, and I actually was able to show, as part of my honorary PhD, that students are most likely to misbehave on the new moon, not the full moon, and not the eclipses. So, that's kind of where the research is.
Incredible. Incredible. And for those of you who are interested in Alex's book, it is called Growing Pains, and it was published by the Wessex Astrologer. And Alex, tell us where we can find your book.
You can find it on my website, or you can go on to the Wessex Astrologer website. It's also on Amazon.
Okay, awesome.
So, it's in different bookshops, but with, lockdown, you can't go into bookshops just yet.
Right, so is it available on Kindle?
Oh, yes, it is. Yes, thanks for asking. Available on Kindle.
Good stuff. Alex, I think it's extraordinary how you took your platform working as a non-conventional school teacher within a conventional school system and used your astrology as a means of building an even deeper connection to your teaching profession. Has that stuck with you today? Are you still teaching in a way that's informed by astrology, or are you even teaching astrology now?
Okay, well, I can't teach astrology in school, although I always find ways of sneaking in a good myth, or talking about the sky, or something else going on. At the moment, I'm on furlough, they call it, which is really funny because that's a military term, meaning that you get given a break from battle. So I've been furloughed, and I plan on staying furloughed for as long as I can, because I'm not going out to a school because I don't think that they're safe. That is my opinion, but and it's so hard to separate all the information that's going around. I don't think it's safe because I know what children are like in schools, and I know that social distancing is something that might be impossible. So my career as a teacher has certainly been one of an adventure. I really was the typical kind of teacher. Then I was a teacher in management, and then I was a teacher who just wanted to do supply work because I started to travel quite a bit. So the way it works before lockdown was that I would get the phone call in the morning. Do you want to teach year 3? I look at my little cheat sheet and see what it says. There is a year group with their Pluto. Every single one of them opposes my Mars, and I always pass on that one. But I have an idea of their Jupiter and Saturn signs always, and always a little notes about things to be aware of. So yes, if I have a troublesome child, which doesn't happen so much anymore because I'm not a school teacher teaching day in and day out anymore. But the way it worked before is if I had a troublesome child, I'd look at their noon chart, but I wasn't really looking at their chart interpreting it. I was looking at how their planets played against mine. Because as the authority figure, the adult in that relationship, I can modify my behavior to suit the needs of the child. That's my responsibility. That's what I have to do. And, it's my job to teach that child. And so it's important that I understand how that child thinks and about the dynamics of our relationship that might affect how that child learns. So there have been times when I've had a very difficult child and I thought, I'm going to bite the bullet, talk to the parents, say I'm an astrologer, and see if I get a time of birth, just so I can get an understanding and a communication between the parent and child, so we can get that kid on the road that's going to keep them in school and out of trouble. And I'm fortunate that I've taken that risk a few times, and I've had no comeback. It could be a completely different story, though, one day, so I'm careful.
Now, Alex, the primary means by which I know about you is specifically you in relation to Vedic astrology. And today you shared a little bit more with me about what your role within the community of Vedic astrology is. Can you share that with our listeners, please?
Yes. In 2014, I just was at ESAR, and I delivered my lecture on astrology and education. And we were at the banquet dinner, because this is a weird synchrony, and I just want to share this. And I was going to visit Austin, Texas next, to visit an old professor friend from university. And this woman walked by that said that she was president of the Austin Astrological Society. And I said, hey, as a matter of fact, I'm going to Austin in a couple of weeks. And she says, when are you coming? And then when I told her, she says, well, you must stay with me. You can speak to my group. And her name is Naomi Bennett, and she became one of my international buddies. And the thing that she told me when I was staying with her, she said, your work is really undervalued here in the USA and in England, because they don't respect astrology. Where you really need to be is in India. So I thought, And I was in the middle of the 6-week tour of the United States, because I hadn't traveled a lot in the United States. And so I wrote to Gopal Bhattacharjee, who was in charge of the Institute of Vedic Culture and conference, and I asked him, would you consider having me speak? I know it's too early for 2015, but maybe 2016. So on the last night of this tour, I got the email from him and says, no, I want you to speak in 2015. So I hadn't even unpacked from one adventure when I was getting ready for the next.
Wow.
So 2015, there I am in Calcutta. And, the noise and all the horns and, the people and, it was quite overwhelming. And I was absolutely blown away by it all. And I won a major prize. I won International Astrologer of the Year 2015, which was, absolutely mind-blowing. And got a crown and a trophy and all that kind of stuff. You put a crown on a moon Leo's head, right? And Gopal and I became really close friends. And he asked me to do some work for him in 2016. But then after that conference, he made me his Secretary General, which involved teaching Western astrology to Vedic astrologers and helping him organize the conference in 2018. So there I am, 2018, in India, not just for 2 weeks, but for 4 months.
Wow.
And I was staying in a little studio flat. And I had to, go to work every single day, be picked up by a driver, just all sorts of things that I wasn't used to, little cultural things. And, being a Westerner, not spending a lot of time in India, I had my own cultural assumptions and my own way of judging people. So let me tell you this story about this really quite scruffy man who pulled up on his bicycle, the worst bicycle I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it looked to me like you know, if you put it into a higher gear, if you even could put it in a higher gear, the thing would completely fall apart. And he had a little beat up old rucksack.
Mhm.
And so I went in my office and, you know, waited. And Gopal came in with this guy. And Gopal says, "This is the guy who makes the crowns." And this man opened up his rucksack and dumped out probably many thousands of pounds worth of jewels on my desk. And there's me just looking
Wow.
at it going, oh my, I cannot believe this is happening. So that taught me something about, you know, looking beyond the poverty. Because I think as a Westerner, that's what we tend to look at. We tend to think, oh, they look poor, so they must be poor. They don't understand that there's a poverty of spirit
Mm.
that I think us Westerners have. And, you know, that keeps us from appreciating what a good life we actually have. And I don't mean in terms of wealth. I just mean in terms of, you know, good hearts,
Right.
good friends, a family, and things like that. So, you know, that was a huge lesson for me.
Hmm. Alex, what I think is interesting about the story that you're sharing is that Vedic astrology and Indian culture in general always seems so open to adaptation and to bringing in other people and also to bringing in other information. And my own experience with Indian culture is that I am a certified Iyengar yoga teacher, which is a really traditional school of yoga. And when we interact with the wider yoga community from India, it's this spirit of wanting to learn more and wanting to bring in more people and wanting to understand more about what's going on this side of the world. Whereas in terms of Western culture, we tend to be very, I dare say, stuck within our Occidentalism or stuck
Mm.
within our Westernism, that we don't really have that same spirit of reception when it comes to entertaining the notion of being in deeper conversations with people from another part of the world. Have you found that to be true?
I was just thinking of another funny story. Um, a Western astrologer said to me, "Oh, I just don't like these mantras. I don't like singing. I just don't like them. They're just so strange." And I said, "What do you think Christmas carols are? You know,
Yeah.
it's a, you know, you're taking something from a particular time of year or a time of day or whatever it is, and you're singing. You know, what's the problem? You know."
Hmm.
So, you know, little things like that. The Western system, of course, is based on the sun and the ecliptic, whereas the Vedic system is based on the moon and the nakshatras and all sorts of other interesting things, stars. You know, every nakshatra has a star.
Mm.
Um, you know, so all sorts of things. And I'm sure you know this. In Vedic astrology, you're not just learning astrology, the language of the stars. You're doing palmistry, numerology, what we would call feng shui, yoga, graphology. You know, you are integrating a whole way of life, a whole system of learning into a single a field of knowledge. Which, you know, here in the West, of course, we separate these things
Yes.
and keep them apart. We don't have this idea of synthesis.
Yes.
I don't think in
Right.
the West.
When I was studying Vedic astrology, that was one of the first things that many of my mentors said to me, because all of my mentors came from India, because I thought that it was very important that if I was studying Vedic astrology, it should be with someone from India. And
Mm.
they all said to me, hey, you know, after we're done with your Vedic astrology training, we're going to teach you palmistry, and then
Mm-hmm.
we're going to teach you numerology, and then we're going to teach you Vastu, and we're going to teach you all of these other components of Vedic spiritual well being, so that you're not just a one hit wonder, but you are a well rounded spiritual advisor and capable of helping people in multiple spheres of their lives. And that has been the singularly most important thing that I've gotten from my interaction with Vedic astrology, that we're not meant to just know one piece of astrology and run with it. We're meant to be astrological counselors, astrological space holders, astrological priests, if you will, and be able to stand in a space for people from multiple spheres of their lives, not just the spheres that they would traditionally come to an astrologer for, but for everything.
Hmm. I couldn't agree with you more. I think that is what makes Vedic astrology so intriguing to me. We were talking a little bit before we started recording. I was just saying, not in this lifetime will I ever be able to call myself a Vedic astrologer. But I have such a great deal of respect. Just like I said, that integration. You're not just, looking at, you're not just an astrologer just because you turn on your computer and look at a chart and analyze it using all these techniques. You are an astrologer because you live and breathe the whole entire system.
Hmm. And what I think that a lot of people know on a conceptual level, but don't realize deep down in a tangible, visceral way, is that Vedic astrology requires a lot, a lot of mental power. I mean, just
Hmm.
memorizing the 27 nakshatras and just
Yep.
memorizing all of the different yogas and everything that's necessary to interpret the natal chart, or any chart for that matter, in Vedic astrology requires you to not just study Vedic astrology, but you have to also essentially study a bit of mythology. It's heavily mathematical. You need to know how to work these
Hmm.
things out in your head. I mean, there are so many other components that you have to be good at in order to consider yourself marginally proficient in Vedic astrology. So I agree with you. Like, I could never call myself a Vedic astrologer in this lifetime either, so I don't. But it's just amazing and so vast the amount of training that the Vedic astrologer has to go through before they can actually hang out their shingle. Whereas in the West, sometimes people don't even get through a year of apprenticeship or a year of training first before they dub themselves astrologer.
Mm. Yeah, or there's been a history of difficulties with somebody who writes star sign columns. And not that I'm down on star sign columns, they're not for me, but I'm not down on them. I'm just saying that it's such a shallow thing. And once you see how they do it in India, it's just like you can't see star signs being the same. It was never my aspiration at any point in my life to be a star sign columnist. So I always had an interest in research and things like that. But it's just I just can never look at those columns the same now that I've been
Mhm.
to India and I've seen what astrologers actually do.
So, Alex, you teach Western astrology at the Krishnamurti Institute of Astrology in India. And what components of Western astrology are you teaching at the Institute?
Well, I tried to give them as much as I could. I tried to be, all the different techniques. They were most fascinated with synastry because a lot of them use astrology for marriage, arranging marriages. Mundane astrology, they were very interested in. I think they have a type of mundane astrology. It's just different. I just kind of felt pathetic, to be honest, Mychal. I just felt like, they were teaching me far more than I was teaching them. And, I just felt like my stuff was just so thin. Even when I was teaching, traditional techniques and talking about deeper subjects, I just kind of felt like, you guys, your advantage is that you have had thousands of years of uninterrupted astrological glory. And I'm teaching from a system that's had fits and starts, over its long history. And I also come from a tradition. My mom's Ojibwe, Native American,
Mm,
First Nation,
mhm.
and I know that our sky stories in the Ojibwe tradition don't match the Greeks, but then some of them amazingly do, and you just wonder how one story could be so connected to a culture so far away. So I had that narrative going through my head as well.
Mhm.
That we just need to stop arguing over sidereal or tropical and just learn from each other. And when Gopal and I talked about, what we wanted from this international conference in 2018, that was what we said. We wanted people to come away as friends, to share our scholarship, and we wanted to move astrology forward away from that divide between East and West.
Mhm.
We all speak the same language, but we all have different accents.
Yeah, yeah. That's
That's the
that's.
way I like the way to say it. It's a big sky, and we can all look at it in our own way. But I
Mhm.
think where we're going to get into trouble is if we try to tell people or try to force people, I'm a traditional astrologer and I have the answers. or I'm, or I'm a Vedic astrologer and I have the answer. Well, I think we get into that kind of language and that kind of ego trip, then we're in trouble. And I think we have to listen to each other. And I think that it's been a huge problem in the astrological world, is that people don't want to listen. They don't want to hear what somebody else has to say. And in a way, that's kind of the problem in every field of knowledge in the world, that people just aren't listening, and they don't want to hear.
And also, I think that when people go into any subject in a specific way, they get so attached to the way in which they enter that subject that it becomes very difficult for people to soften themselves and to allow themselves to entertain multiple perspectives of seeing the same thing. So even in the West, we get so caught up in the fact that I'm a horary astrologer and I practice horary because I think that it's better than natal, and I'm a natal astrologer and I practice natal because I think that it's the best thing since sliced bread. And we get so caught up in these different compartments of astrology, and then there's the bigger backdrop of, well, I'm a traditional astrologer or I'm a modern astrologer, and the modern astrologer saying that the traditional folks are stuck in the past, and the traditional folks saying that the modern folks don't know anything because they have no roots or connection to the tradition. It's just a lot of bickering back and forth. And I think that at the end of the day, what we need to start focusing on a bit more is the astrology that works, and the astrology that has a practical, tangible effect within the objective, observable world. Because if that became more of a standard of our astrology and less the need to hold the arbitrary parameters that define the different styles of astrology, then I think that we stand to not only further define the things that we practice separately and apart, but we also serve to build a more uniquely textured approach to our astrology, where we're all having dialogues with each other and we're all applying things that we learn from each other within the context of the laboratory of our own practice to see if those same things work for us.
Yep. I think, we're getting into the realm where we need to hear what our skeptics are saying. Our skeptics will say, hey, listen, confirmation bias, or, you're cherry picking, or, you're doing any number of things that, fall into the category of bad scientific practice. And I don't think that, astrology is a science. It has features of science, but it's probably not ever going to get away from that pseudoscientific label that it has. But, we can do a lot better. I work a lot with Robert Curry and a few other researchers. And, we like to do peer reviews, which means that, you write something out and somebody else checks it out for you. It's not to do with, making you feel silly or finding your grammar mistakes. It's really about, helping, checking your method so that your method can be used in another way. And to be a little bit more personal with my database, I love working with other astrologers who look at the lunar phase and who have data for me that I can look at and run my theories against, and they'd run their theories against mine as well. So, it's a more of a collaboration that we need. I'm sure scientists have little bun fights on social media. We don't see them because we're not scientists, we're not looking. I'm sure that stuff happens in their world. But when they're looking at us and seeing how we're working, they're finding things that are very elemental mistakes that we need to tighten up. Retrograde Mercury, for example. Every time I hear an astrologer say, "Oh, my computer crashed, Mercury must be retrograde," I'm sure a little fairy dies somewhere, right? Because when you start saying that something up there directly affects something down here, you're in big trouble. So you need to put some data behind it, and my good friend Frank Wachowski, has done some work on delayed flights and Mercury retrograde. I know other people are doing different kinds of projects. Franco Minitel is doing some work too. Great stuff, So and I mentioned Robert Curry and Ken McRitchie and a whole lot of other people that are all working towards improving research. David Cochrane. Improving research. I think once we show people that researchers aren't just living in some little ivory tower, that we are trying to bring our research to improve the craft of astrology, I think more people will get involved with that. And I think for me, that'd be great. That's, again, my opinion on how I'd like to see astrology go.
Now, Alex, I know that your particular point of interest and focus within astrology for your own practice is psychological astrology. Can you tell us a little bit about why you came into psychological astrology and what do you think is so valuable about it for the 21st century?
Yeah, I'm kind of smiling to myself because I'm thinking, even if you say I'm a psychological astrologer, which I also class myself as, I'm thinking about, well, I'm not the typical psychological astrologer. I actually studied behavioral psychology at university, training rats and pigeons, right? Operant or classical conditioning, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't like it because I was kind of hoping for more of the Freudian kind of hope, but at Western Michigan University, that was not going to happen. I wimped out on the stats. When I got to statistics, I was like, I'm out. I'm going to be an English major or something else. I don't have to deal with numbers. And my very good friend, my astro brother, Sam Reynolds, says, be careful what you hate because it's going to come back to you. And statistics came back to me in a big way. And, that's when I started doing, my database is huge. I have 40,000 entries at least. And that's just, I haven't really counted what is all in there of these student behavior reports and lunar phase. Psychological astrologer, but I'm more into statistics these days and more into, counting things and improving my own database.
Mm-hmm. But what is it about that whole concept of psychological astrology as a field that really resonates with you?
I think it has a lot to do with helping somebody understand their habits. When people come to an astrologer, of course, they have a problem. They never come to you because they want to tell you how wonderful things are. They always have a problem. And so it's helping them unravel that problem and looking at their own habits, looking at how they're reinforcing those habits just with their own behavior. And, helping them come to that realization that, I can change. I don't have to wait for some transit to hit me. I can actually work with my Saturn to change my life and to make things more tolerable or to improve my relationship with somebody else. So this, that fascinates me, that the idea of taking responsibility, Saturn, and transforming that into something positive. I don't know how closely you follow me on Facebook. A few nights ago, I had a terrible nightmare. I'm arachnophobe, and I dreamed about this giant spider. And,
I saw that.
Yeah, terrible dream. And I woke up really shaken up, and I didn't want to deal with it. But I eventually analyzed that dream, and just applying a little bit of astrology, helped me understand why I was having this kind of dream, and more importantly, what I can do to avoid, that again. And so it's stuff like that with psychology that I love, focusing on the behavior and changing it to help that person have a better life. And I see a lot of parents and children, because you don't see children one-to-one under 18. You don't do that. That's against safeguarding and child protection. You always have a parent with the child, and working with parents and children and helping them see, if you just change this a little bit, your relationship's going to be better, you're opening up communication better, and these problems that you're experiencing with your child at 13, you can make them better and you can help them through. So that I think that's a fascination with me. How the brain works, the cycles of development in children, all that stuff, like Piaget, interests me.
I know that you're well aware of the opinion that a lot of traditional astrologers have regarding psychological astrology probably not being rigorous enough or probably not being specific enough. What do you feel is really the truth in all of this, or how do you feel about this argument that traditionalists have regarding psychological astrology?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to tell anybody that they're wrong or that, they're not doing something right. That's not my business. By the way, I just want to point out, I have a certificate from the School of Traditional Astrology up here. Deborah Holding was my teacher, so I have gone through this course and I learned a lot. But to me, when I hear that, I just think, there's a missing bit there. So if you go back to the Vedic model, okay, so we think about what Vedic astrologers will say, that they seem to say things quite fated, and this will happen. You will marry this kind of person. This is kind of job. La la la. But they will also give you a remedy that's going to help you, overcome whatever that is. So to me, that's not, it's not quite as fated as it sounds, because they're telling you, here's how you fix it. Yeah. Which is the other thing that strikes me about India as a whole, is that, everything can be fixed. That guy with the bicycle that I thought was, going to fall apart, he'd probably fixed it 10 million times. He probably has the money to go. He sells jewelry. He probably has the money to buy 20 new bikes, but no, he's going to stick with that bike and keep fixing it. And that's I think the approach. It's very different between Vedic and traditional astrology. So I just think that there's a misunderstanding there somewhere along the line. But as I said before, to each their own. It's not my place to act like I know everything and to tell somebody else what to do. I'm just doing what I think I'm good at, and I'm always trying to improve on what I do. I try to keep my nose in the cage, and not interfere with somebody else's cage.
Yeah. I've never actually understood what the major difference was between psychological astrology and traditional astrology, because at the end of the day, I think that if you hear a good astrologer speaking, it's going to come out sounding like good astrology. And at the end of the day, we all tend to come to the exact same conclusions very often. And so I think that the line in the sand shouldn't necessarily be between psychological astrology as something separate and apart from traditional astrology. I mean, even though they did develop in different times and probably for different reasons, but I think the line should really be between what constitutes good astrology, good, grounded, connected astrology, and what constitutes astrology that isn't so strong and that probably isn't so studied and that doesn't really represent the entire system well. How are you personally using your approach to astrology, not just even within the context of your teaching work, but I mean, just how do you find yourself living with astrology as a practitioner, as a professional, and as someone who just loves the field?
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but my practice has boomed. I suddenly, dealing with a lot of people and all on the internet and things like that. So I'm seeing myself using more astrology, doing more research. I'm still doing an awful lot of counting of things and, standard deviation and all that kind of stuff. But, I see myself as moving away from the teaching profession and more into astrology, because I'm uncertain if I'm actually going to go back to the classroom because of this virus. Just waiting to see how things play out. So I like I said, I try to do what I think is best for the work that I need to do. I'm willing to listen to other people's ways of doing things, but it has to be useful to me.
And what are some of the techniques that you use, Alex, that you found to be very useful to you within your client work?
Okay, usually when I'm working with parents and children, I'm basically working with the parents through their Saturn. I don't think I feel I have to branch anything out further than that. The parent is the authority figure, and they need to be that authority figure, and they need to help to open the doors for their child to use their Jupiter. I'm starting to work a little bit more with dream work. It's funny that I had this strange dream at a time in my life when I'm actually seeing clients who have want me to work with dreams. I think it's important that we keep adding to our toolkit and we keep learning new techniques. A lot of the reasons why I'm uncomfortable with certain techniques is because I haven't had a chance to test them out. It's like asking my opinion on a Lamborghini when I've never driven one. I don't know what it's like. I can't tell you. I can't give you an opinion. I haven't sat behind the wheel before. I probably never will, but I'm getting at.
You probably will. So, Alex, some things that you brought up that I think are really interesting are one, your work with astrological dream work, and also two, the work that you do in terms of teaching synastry in India. Now, I'm really interested in the synastry portion because I was of the persuasion that India had a long-standing tradition of synastry, or am I mistaken with that?
No, no, you're right. It's just not the way that we do it. And I like a lot of things when I was teaching um, my students, it all came down to the main differences were that we used a round chart and we divided the circle into 12, and everything seemed to be so much simpler.
Mm.
And I think that was their challenge, was to look at things in this more simplistic way. Aspects they didn't use very much, so those had to be taught. But yeah, they do have a long history of synastry and of marriage arrangements, and they do have romantic marriages, marriages for romance. But an awful lot of work that astrologers do is around arranging marriages. So yeah, they do, but it's just different.
Hmm. And so when you now go into India and teach synastry, are you teaching it from the perspective of just comparing the two charts separately, or are you teaching it from the perspective of comparing the two charts and then also a composite chart?
Yes, both. Yes, the bi-wheel and also the composite chart. They don't have the system of midpoints that we do. So I don't think that, I'm pretty sure they don't use composite charts the way we do.
So did you find it interesting, or did they find it challenging to really adopt this concept of a third chart coming in as the integration of two charts? Or how was teaching that aspect? Because I know that this concept of the composite chart is a rather new practice within our astrology. So was that something difficult for them to wrap their minds around, or how did you find it was to teach that there?
Yeah, it was difficult. And the concept of midpoints is difficult too, especially when you're trying to teach and you're working with symbols and you accidentally call, Jupiter Mercury or something like that, and then you got to say, oh no, sorry, I meant, I meant something else.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of stuff too, when you're distracted by the students, because they are so keen. There's so many questions, and how do you interpret that, and how does this work, and what books should we read, and they were certainly so enthusiastic to learn Western astrology. It was a great experience, and as I said, it was such a great. I just felt so close to them because here we all are searchers, and here we are together, and we're talking about two different systems, and we're not killing each other. We're listening to each other, and we're learning from each other. So that's what made that experience amazing.
So, Alex, I know that you've done a lot of work in terms of the astrology that you do, as well as the teaching that you do with children and teens. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on within the backdrop of your mind? What is the astrological framework within which you apply your astrological knowledge to the work that you do with children and young adults?
Yeah, well, my astrological framework is one that it has to work. It has to work with what I'm doing. So it was in teaching. So my astrological framework is based on Jupiter and Saturn and a little bit of Uranus. In
Mm-hmm.
that a child has a Saturn in a sign, tropical signs, because we live in a tropical culture. And then they have the first square in Saturn at the age of 7. They have the opposition at 14. They have another Saturn square at 21, and then the Saturn return. And then Jupiter has its framework too. Every 3 years there's a significant transit to its natal position. And so, we get to this teenage area where they have the Jupiter return, the Saturn opposition, and then before they have the Saturn opposition, they have Jupiter sextile its natal place. At the same time, they have the first Ptolemaic aspect from our outer planet, Uranus, at the same time, at around the age of 13, 14,
Mm-hmm.
which is the age where teachers when I've done surveys, things like that, is the age that teachers and parents find most challenging. So they're having all that going on, and then they have the Saturn opposition and they calm down. And in all that thing going on, what is happening is the brain development is just exploding. And so it's really important that we give these younger adolescents, the opportunities, Jupiter, opportunities to travel, to explore, to learn new languages. But what happens here in the UK is that the exam years, the 16-year-olds, as they're preparing for exams, they tend to get all the resources. It's taken out of the funding for the younger ones and given to the older ones so they can pass their exams. So I think that's a real tragedy. And if you read some of my stuff, you can see that there's a lot of data that I've collected to back that up, to say we're doing it wrong, guys. We need to change that. So that's what I mean by astrological framework. There's a particular way that I'm working that is going to enhance my goals, my own personal goals and targets, which may be completely different than somebody else's because they're not working with the same way that I am, with the same external things that I'm working with.
Mm-hmm. Now, another interesting piece that you mentioned, Alex, was the work that you do in terms of astrology and dreams. Can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about what astrological dream work is and how you got into it?
I came into it by accident, but my good friend Rod Susskind from South Africa had done this wonderful piece for our conference, because we have a conference magazine on astrology and dreams and how to interpret them. And also my friend Christos Arcos from Greece had a similar kind of thing that he was working with dreams. So I'd read both articles and I was very, very intrigued. So Rod's, he was using a little bit of horary around, when you start to interpret the dream, when you understand the question that the person is asking you. So I had this really random client said, I had this unusual dream or unusual experience. Can you help me try to unravel what it means? And so using Rod's technique with the moon as the significator of the dreamer and looking at the ruler of the ninth house of the planets in the ninth house, Regimentanus, system. And, from there, I helped this person unravel the meaning of the dream. And this person was, really over the moon and excited. And then just really weirdly, I had another one. It's like, sometimes when you're doing this, you attract a certain kind of people over and over again. So I have, my Neptune is currently opposing my Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And so it's just funny that I'm attracting people that are having intense dreams. So I was kind of honing that technique and working with people and trying to, make sure that I'm doing the right thing too. And then I had my own special spider dream. And, in the Ojibwe tradition, we have dream catchers. And they were given, the spider grandmother showed the Ojibwe how to weave these things so that it protects the children's dreams. Because when you go to sleep, your spirit roams the earth. And then whatever you experience comes back as bad dreams. But if you go through the dream catcher, you're not going to have those bad dreams. So it's just like a lot of things converged to bring me to this point where, I'm finding that I'm, these are the kind of clients that I'm attracting. So it's a very interesting process and something completely different to the way I've been working.
That's amazing. And it's so funny that you mentioned Rod Susskind again, because you're the second person this week to mention his name. So Rod, if you're listening to this, we have to get you on the show because he's been mentioned several times and always in the best of ways.
Well, he's an amazing person. He's a Sangoma. We might interpret that as witch doctor or something like that. And, I got to spend some time with him in Cape Town, and, we really bonded, over our similar backgrounds and in India. And he's another one of my international buddies that I see all over the place, but always inspiring.
So, Alex, do you think that astrological dream work is something that all counseling astrologers should have as a part of their toolkit? Or where do you think that it fits within the larger scope of our approach to helping clients?
Okay, well, think about how often we dream. We dream asleep 1/3 of our lives. And you can have really troubling dreams that you can't make sense out of. So I think it's, as a technique, it is something that should definitely be in our toolkit. But with respect, it should also be something that we practice a lot before we start. What was your expression? Hanging your shingle on the door. It's
Flinging the
something that
shingle.
you need to, you know, you need to feel comfortable with that, and confident that you are doing good and not actually harming somebody or disturbing them even further. So within careful boundaries, I think it is something that can be taught to astrologers to use.
Alex, within the context of where we as astrologers find ourselves in the 21st century, where do you think astrology and astrologers can be most useful within the lives of others?
Well, I do think, you know, just going back to the story about when I was banned from using astrology, and I was really careful to keep, full on astrology out of my teaching. There was a young man that I was in my year group, and he was one of these kids that was always in trouble, but we could never quite put a finger on it. And we knew from his first day at secondary school that he was going to be a problem. We all thought, if this kid is going to be in trouble one day, he might not make it all the way through. And we knew this, and all of us threw our hands up in the air and said, we can't do anything. Well, he did come to the end of the road with his education with us. And I was walking home from school one day, and I saw loads of police and our children in their uniforms being very excited. And I saw a body under a sheet. And I thought, oh my God, this is one of our children. So I introduced myself to the police. I probably know the parent. I can probably help you find him quickly. And they were like, no, we don't. It's okay. Just move on. And then I went home and I did whatever every other parent, modern parent and teacher does to find out something, is go on social media. And I found out that the body under the sheet wasn't one of my students. It was the victim of this boy that had caused so many problems. And of course, the next day at school, we were told we weren't to talk about it. We had our guidance counselor. If there's any problems, we're to go to the guidance counselor. And I just remember looking down this long row of teachers and just thinking, we're so ill-equipped to deal with this kind of problem. We have 1,000 kids in school. We got one guidance counselor. Anyway, so he was put in jail, and as the outreach person, I was sent to go talk to him. And so when I looked at this kid, behind bars, and he came to sit with me and talk to me, under supervision, of course. And I just thought, I'm looking at a kid who is now going to learn how to be a better criminal. I'm looking at a ruined life. And, so from that point on, I thought to myself, okay, you know what? If I am an astrologer and I think I have skills, then it is my responsibility to get in there and do something, do the best I can. And I get kind of eaten up with guilt over this. And so that changed my perception of how I'm going to deal with children. I'm not going to be, oh, I can't do that because I don't have permission. I'm going to try to play the catcher in the rye and help children and parents avoid the situation of, this ruined life. So I think that's my responsibility.
Wow. Whew. Alex, in terms of your work with children and parents and astrology, how important have you found it for parents to have some understanding of the astrology of their children?
I think it's very important. I think it can save a lot of problems. Astrology can't answer all the questions, but understanding your Saturn helps you to be a stronger parent, a disciplinarian. And we live in a world where there's a lot of single moms who don't have support, moms who don't have family support at all. That's the kind of world we live in. So I think it's important that you think about the parable of the sower. The seeds sometimes drop on the hard ground and the birds eat it, and sometimes they get blown away by the wind. But sometimes they find the right soil and they thrive and they bear fruit. So we need to help parents and teachers as well to find this fertile soil for the seeds they're planting, and that they learn how to take care of it and nurture it the best that they can. Teachers and parents are very busy, but we can all I think we all try to be a little bit, do a better job.
Now, another thing that comes up, Alex, is this thought in astrology that we don't really develop into the fullness of our charts until a little bit later in life. So, as a child, we haven't really articulated every aspect of our charts as, say, somebody who is 30 years old, for example. So,
Mhm.
when you use astrology in relation to children, what parts of their charts do you think is most obvious and evident? And what parts of the charts do you focus on in terms of understanding who this child is, who you're faced with?
Um, you raise a really important point. I don't make predictions for children because they're growing at such an exponential rate that I don't want to be the one that interferes with that. If there's a problem, I'm going to talk to the parents, both if I can, about how we can sort of fix this and put things back on track again. So I think it's really important that, I think Jupiter and Saturn and a little bit of Uranus are the planets that speak to us in adolescence. The inner planets really aren't our business. Mercury, people ask me about Mercury for learning. Mercury is about rote learning, repeating what you hear. Jupiter is that leap of faith it takes. Take a concept and make it your own. So Mercury is sounding out letters, but Jupiter is the skill that it takes to put words together, to form sentences, to form paragraphs, to form an essay eventually. So that expansion is where the Jupiter is, and where I think that, as teachers, where we should be focusing on. And Jupiter isn't such a personal planet that we're not invading someone's privacy, because I think that's really important, that we're not revealing somebody's secret in front of the parent and wrecking that parent-child relationship. So, within certain boundaries, I think that astrology can be incredibly powerful to help the parent understand themselves, so they're a better parent, so they can understand their child, to help that child develop those skills. And I think you're absolutely right. I think the birth chart, the natal chart, is looking at baby pictures. It just shows where you were when you were born. It's the transits, the progressions, and things like that actually flesh things out. And as we also spoke about, I think free will plays a part of this, in that, people make choices that aren't good for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I've worked a lot of addiction problems where the addiction started at that Jupiter Uranus sextile in teenagehood, and they were unable, because of the brain development, to break away from that addiction, and it just got worse as they got older. So, looking at identifying critical times to start a new habit, because that age is an ideal time to learn how to play an instrument, to learn how to sing, learn how to perform. So I think astrology has an amazing potential to help parents and children and teachers.
Mm-hmm. So, Alex, there are a few books that I know about on astrology with children, and a couple of them say that in a child's early life, it's important for their parents to know about their moon sign, or it's important for their parents to know about their rising sign. Uh, have you found that truthfully necessary within the context of the work that you do? Or what aspects do you think parents really do need to know about the children who they're dealing with?
Well, as I said, I do think that Jupiter and Saturn are extremely important. But the moon, of course, is also important, and you can't. I mean, you have to look at the chart to understand it's is it more important than Jupiter? You can make that kind of judgment, and I just think that you have to be a little bit careful about labeling the child. Moon and Leo. I use my own moon sign. Moon and Leo, the show off, the stage, all that kind of stuff. I think you need to be a little bit careful when you're dealing with the inner planets, which is why I'm much happier dealing with Jupiter and Saturn. First of all, I'm talking about something that I know. I know about teaching. I've been a teacher most of my adult life, so I have that expertise. So I'm much more comfortable talking about that. But the moon and the ascendant sign, they're all important. I just have a light touch with them. That's all.
Got it. So, for astrologers listening to this podcast who are parents themselves, what do you think they should know about raising children in an astrological household?
Well,
And
I have 3 Aries children. They're all grown now, and they're all little warriors. they're all warriors in their own way, and they've all caused various problems for this Cancerian mother in their own various ways. So, I don't want to come out sounding like I'm high-handed and that I know everything, that I've never made a mistake. I don't want that to come across, or as I'm a perfect teacher or anything like that. But what astrology has helped me do is it's helped me understand, the things that upset me might not be the things that upset my kids. There are different ways of channeling all that Aries energy. My eldest son is a boxer, for example. So there's ways of understanding, how children behave and how they work and how you as a parent functions, that, astrology can be very, very helpful. And I think, when I work with parents, sometimes they just want a little bit of sympathy, for what, and then they want to be told, listen, we're not perfect. You're carrying all this guilt for something that you can't help, at this moment. But this is what you can do. And maybe try this, and encouraging that parent to feel empowered. Because I think that in the modern world that we live in, parents are being told all the time, don't give your kid Sunny D, don't give them this. You don't need to tell a woman how to have a baby. Yes, you need to keep her safe, but they don't need all this medical intervention. So I kind of feel that, this way with astrology, that we're not telling a parent what to do, or we're just helping them through. Children grow so quickly. 1 minute they're babies, next minute they're going to school, and the next minute they're graduating. It's such a special time. And as a parent myself, I know that there's bad times, and there's really joyful times, and there's all the in between times. But it's a process, it's a journey, and not everything is going to be perfect. And it's all part of life, that we have to take the rough with the smooth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, another piece, Alex, that I think is really an interesting topic to me, and it's because a friend of mine recently had a baby, and two other friends of mine are pregnant, is everyone wants to know about their child's chart as soon as their child is born. At least anyone who is an astrologically minded parent wants to know about their child's chart as soon as their child is born. And I am really cautious about this for a lot of the same things that you've identified, insofar as this child is a clean canvas. They're a blank slate. We shouldn't go around casting anything on top of them before they've even had chance to start walking. So I just want to know from you, how do you feel about this aspect of child astrology?
When parents come in and they want to know their child's chart, they're very surprised when I start with them and their own Saturn. And I want to have that groundwork done with them before I move on to the child. And I think I think it's okay to talk to the parent about the child's chart, and but to always bring it back to the idea that you're the one that has the child. It's the child belongs to the stars, but you're the one that's taking care of it. And so I do reports for children too, because I think that's how you learn about astrology. So I don't think there's anything wrong with engaging with parents about their children's chart, but I think you have to be careful that you're not being a soothsayer with that child's chart. You're not telling them the future and how it's going to be.
So you think that from the perspective of us just talking about the potential behavior and the potential makeup and the psychology of that child, that is actually where astrology is more useful in terms of working with children?
Okay, well, just think about the child who has Mars in Aries and Saturn in Capricorn in their square. Think about the damage you can do in telling the parent, oh, well, you're going to expect some really bad temper tantrums, and this child, needs to be, you have to be careful with your language, I think. And then I think it's more useful to, put something around, like when the child throws that temper tantrum, maybe think about ways that you can diffuse it. remove all sharp objects, remove all the furniture away, let them go, or get them into martial arts or something like that, or something like that. But you're not dictating the outcome of somebody who's growing at an exponential rate. I think that's what you have to be careful of.
Mm-hmm.
And why I think that people who work with children or who have experience with children, it's important that they have that experience, that they can work with children's charts. I'm a little bit wary of people who don't have experience getting in there and thinking that they until you don't have to be a parent, but I think you have to have that working with children outside of the astrological practice before you can really start integrating it into what you do as an astrologer. I just think that's you have to be careful that you don't talk outside what you know.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think is some of the basic training a professional astrologer can take in order to better equip them to work with children within the context of their astrological practice?
I think it's going to take practice, and I'm actually, unless a astrology student has the very firm foundation of the basics, that they're not ready to work with children, or what was that? Hang your shingle.
Hang your shingle.
They're not. You're not saying that you could do something when you haven't practiced it. I think that you have to be, because when you work with parents and children, you're working with a relationship that is important, but could also be fragile. And you need to know what to do when there's a severe conflict that might involve a phone call to child protection, because the child disclosed something, not likely to do in front of a parent. But you need to know what to do. And I just, one of the things I was really fearful about was somebody, a very well-known astrologer, said to me, "But you work with children's charts and you see children that are unsupervised." And I'm like, no, I don't. I never see unsupervised children in my office. No way. But that people think that that's even a thing concerns me. You would never put yourself in a vulnerable position like that as a practicing astrologer with a one-to-one consultation with a child without a parent or legal guardian present. You just, you can't do that. So there's a lot of ethical questions and work to do around children's charts that I think astrologers need to be aware of before they start saying that they can work with children's charts.
Right. Well, what I think that opens up for you, at least, Alex, is a field where you can put together educational programs for practicing astrologers to train them, not even so much in the astrology, but to train them in some of the ethics involved in terms of working with children, and probably even indeed the astrology, because your approach to astrology and to looking at the Jupiter-Saturn relationships between parents and children and teachers, I have never actually seen or read about that anywhere before. So I think it creates this field for you to really set the standard for what it means to be a practicing astrologer who counsels parents and children.
Well, I have worked with MISPA, which is the online Center for Psychological Astrology, Liz Green's group. I have done two major webinars with that. I've worked with CIA as well with a webinar for them. Kepler College, I'm doing a full course for Kepler College soon. And I'm currently writing a column for the Organization for Professional Astrologers on working with children's charts, which many of these points that I've brought up, I've written in. So there's lots and lots of things that I'm doing to help astrologers understand their limitations, but also the opportunities and why we should be training ourselves to work with children's charts and alongside their parents, because it's so important. I'm thinking back to my student in jail. We have a huge responsibility, I think, to do what we can to keep people from getting hurt.
Mm-hmm. Alex, what would be the one takeaway you would want for listeners and viewers to get from this today in relation to the work that you've done with children and astrology?
I think if I were going to speak to an astrologer who's just getting started, I would say that, it's important to get the foundation work done. Don't worry about trying to pick a school that's going to match your particular preference, because your preferences are probably going to change throughout the course. Keep your mind open, but do the foundations first. And then once you get that nice firm foundation, then you can start adding it into the toolkit. And if working with children speaks to you, well, I'm working towards getting training around that in various groups. So yeah, I think that's about it, really.
Great.
Huge potential, but also a minefield to be careful of.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for joining us today here on the Oraculos True Divination podcast. I have truly learned a lot about this field of working with children and astrology because, like I said, I had read a few books on the topic, and my concept of what it would be like was completely different from what it is you've expressed here today. So I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity to sit with you and learn from you and really see how you apply astrology, not just theoretically, but how you've applied it within the classroom and how you also apply it to working with parents and children, because it's so important for us to know that we are in spaces where we're understood as we're growing up. And I think that the work that you're doing allows children a better opportunity to be understood by their parents and by their teachers. And that's such important work. So thank you so much, Alex, for being here. And thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for having me. Namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar.
It's Bengali, not Sanskrit.
Right, right. My aunt actually has Bengali roots, so she says namaskar, and she never says namaste. So I've been saying namaskar all my life.
Ah, wonderful.
Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty good synchronicity.
yeah. There you go. So to all of our listeners and viewers out there, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support of the Oraculos True Divination podcast. I honestly wouldn't be able to do any of this if it wasn't without your encouragement. So please continue to continue to comment. Your feedback means everything to me. And also continue to subscribe to the Oraculos True Divination podcast. Share it with your friends, share it with your astrological colleagues so that we can continue circulating these wonderful interviews with these wonderful astrologers from around the world. So until next time, everyone, I'm Mychal Bryan, and I'm so grateful for you for being here and for being a part of my life. Be well, be safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful, and I'm very well pleased.